Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Deciding if and when to have a child is a very personal decision. Now, thanks to the lifting of stigma and advances in reproductive medicine, that decision doesn't always have to be restricted to the ideal childbearing years. On today's programme, we'll meet women who became mothers after the age of 40. Now, my co-host is digital producer Malika Bilal. Our online community have been weighing in on this and then some. What do they say?
Because they all have mothers, or some of them are mothers, and so they are sharing their personal experiences with us. And that's exactly what we want you at home to do as well. You can tweet your take with hashtag AJStream.
Now, all over the world, the average age of first-time mothers is climbing. In the United States, the number of babies born to women aged 45 and older, while still relatively small, has more than tripled in the past 2 decades. In the UK, pregnancy rates for over 40s have more than doubled in the past 20 years. And in Japan, the average age for having a first child is now almost 31.
Doctors have long warned that giving birth at a later age is risky for both mother and child. They could face complications like stillbirth, miscarriage, high blood pressure, diabetes, and preeclampsia. And even with advances in maternal medicine, doctors still caution. So here's a comment from community member and my own brother-in-law, Dr. Idris Abdurrahman.
I would definitely say that one of the biggest trends that I have noticed since starting residency 14 years ago is that women are waiting longer and longer to bear children. And I think a lot of the advances in reproductive technology have allowed this, and women can have career first and think about children later. And that's why you see a situation like Jenna Jackson, pregnant in her 50s. One thing that I caution my patients, though, is that, and it may not be at the forefront of your mind when you're 25 necessarily, but if you're going to have eggs removed and frozen for later use, you want to do that earlier as opposed to later, because once you hit 35, the risk of genetic issues does increase exponentially.
But new studies also suggest there are benefits to late pregnancy and motherhood, lower rates of some cancers for the mother, and higher education and physical fitness rates for both mom and child.
So to discuss these risks and rewards are ladies who have helped women through it and have been through it as well. From Houston, Texas, Dr. Shannon Clark is an obstetrician, gynecologist, and maternal fetal medicine specialist. In San Francisco, Melissa Reyes is a media producer and mother of 2 daughters. And in London, Naomi Green is a writer and filmmaker and mother of 1 little girl. Good to have you here, everybody. Let me show you something here. I suspect you've seen it. This picture of a couple and their little baby. We just scroll up so you can see the headline, Indian woman gives birth at 70 with the help of IVF. Melissa, is it ever too old? What's too old to have a baby? What would be your threshold? What would you be saying? I don't think I can do the nappies at this age. I can't do diapers when I'm 68. I'm drawing a line. What age would you say? I was like, okay, that's too old.
I can't do those sleepless nights at 70. That's
right. Right.
Personally, I don't think I could do it after 60. That would be, that would be too hard. I just can't stay up all night anymore. But if people are happy with it, if they can take care of the child, if the child can be happy, then everyone has to make their own decisions.
Naomi, what's too old? Too old to have a baby?
I agree. I think with the last speaker that it is a very personal decision. There is, of course, a difference between biological age and chronological age, and it is said that people who look good on the outside probably are younger on the inside too. So it's quite a individual thing to decide when is the right time or when it's too late.
Let me just show you this picture again. Dr. Shannon, everybody's being very generous here. It's like, you decide. You want to have a baby at 70, you go ahead. Look at this couple again, though, Dr. Shannon. I don't want to influence you in any way, but as a doctor who looks after women who want to try and get pregnant, would you ever say, okay, this is too old, too old?
Well, I think that one of the important things to keep in mind is that medicine has afforded us many capabilities of doing some amazing things. But just because we're able to do it doesn't mean it should be done. There are some ethical considerations. I'm sure despite how healthy this 70-year-old may have been, she was still a risky pregnancy. And then you have to think about the ethics of considering the child and the longevity of the parents being in this child's life. That's why in the United States and a lot of other countries around this world, there are strict age restrictions on when IVF can be done. So I would never tell someone from a personal standpoint, it's not really any of my business. However, from a medical standpoint, there are significant and realistic things that we have to consider, both ethically and for the health of the mother.
Well, Dr. Clark,
when is it too old from?
Go ahead.
When is it too old for a man to become a father? The chap sitting next to that lady looks pretty mature as well. Do we have a feeling about that? Because around me in North London, it's really very common to see fathers in their 40s and 50s. In fact, men under 40 look quite unusual.
Right, we're considering when we're actively doing IVF for someone. And I know that in the United States and elsewhere, they do have caps on both maternal and paternal age. And it varies across the board. Now, that's not my area of expertise, but I do know that there are restrictions for when we actually medically intervene to do something like IVF to help a couple get pregnant.
You know, Dr. Clark, there's an interesting idea that one of our community members raised. This is Marie, who says medical science has not only expanded our lifespans to where 50 is the new 30, but made it possible for older women to safely have children at a later age. Now, I know someone whose mom had him at 60, so there's little anecdotal evidence there. But I want to focus on what she said in this first tweet about 50 being the new 30. What do you say to that, medically speaking?
Medically speaking, yes. I think as the years go by, and this is 2016, women are taking better care of themselves. And physically, we are, in general, we have the capabilities to be in much better shape. So I do agree with that. There is some thought that 40 is the new 30, 50 is the new 30. And that may be so physically, but it doesn't necessarily mean that reproductively. Ovarian aging is a realistic hurdle that a lot of us have to go through. And no matter how healthy we may be physically, the ovary still ages, and we have to keep that in mind. So we need to make sure that message is spread out to all of these women who are coming up and delaying childbearing, that even though you may be physically fit and have a healthy lifestyle, the ovary may or may not be in line with that as far as how the ovary ages over time.
Sure. Let me just look at these two little munchkins here. So we've got Etta and Josephine. Melissa, they're yours. Where are they right now, Etta and Josephine?
They're at the park with their father. They're a little overly tired, so if they were in the house, you'd hear, I think, too much screaming and crying.
So as somebody, I don't even want to call you an older mum, but statistically speaking, you are an older mum. What are you giving your two little ones that you couldn't have done 10 years ago, 15 years ago? What's the pros for you?
Oh, I was nowhere near a state, mentally or emotionally to be, raising kids. Could I have done it physically? Yes, sure. But I now am in a place where I can share not just the rules of a life, but a philosophy for them. I've been through my career, I've had the ups and downs, and I'm comfortable now staying home with them, giving them all my attention, and not being worried that I'm going to be either resentful or bitter or feel like I'm missing out on something career-wise or elsewhere in the world. So they have a much calmer mom, somebody that can teach them, I think, in a much, broader sense of what life can bring to them. So I'm extremely happy that I waited. Lucky, however, realizing that I did, I rolled the genetic dice to some extent. And,
Melissa,
happy there.
It's interesting that you mentioned your life experiences. That's something that someone else shared with us. This is Eunice, who says, my mom was 45 and my dad was 47 when she was born. She goes on to say, I had the privilege of hearing them speak about their youth, what worked, what didn't, and why. And that experience informed my perspective about life. Naomi, I'm wondering if you think that giving this experience, the reality of the longer life that you've lived before you had a child is one of the advantages.
I certainly don't think I would have been able to be a calm and relaxed, patient person in my 20s. So Sadie does have lots of advantages. And I do want to point out that the key to this discussion we're having is about first-time mothers, because of course there's nothing unusual about women having later children right into their 40s and 50s. My own grandmother, after whom I named Sadie, was born to her parents in 1908 when they were in their 47 and 48 years old. She lived till she was 106. She died a year or so ago. For her, she was a wise and wonderful woman, and you certainly wouldn't think that her life was in any way misshaped by having had middle-aged parents.
To go along with what Naomi's saying, through my experience with starting my website, she's exactly correct. First-time moms is the key here. There are many women who, with the first marriage, had their first one or two, even more kids in their late 20s or early 20s, maybe have gotten remarried and started a new relationship, and now they're well after 35 and wanting to have a family with their second spouse. Then there's also some of us, including myself, who did delay childbearing to become a first-time mom or attempt to become a first-time mom well after age 35. So that's kind of where these two groups of women fall into. But the key here is first-time moms, because those of us who are trying and those of us who have succeeded never were a mom at age 20, 25, or a little bit later. Being a first-time mom after age 35 I feel is a little bit different based on what I hear from my patients and also through the babies after 35 community.
So I'm just looking at the website that you started up, Dr. Clark, Babies After 35, and it's all about education. There's a little section here, find out more. I'm going to click through a little bit more. And it tells you about pregnancy after 35 is subject to an increased risk of complications. And then you go through and you lay it out. Why are women not more knowledgeable about their own fertility? Why are you still, 2016, explaining fertility to women?
Well, I think if I could change one thing, and having been through OBGYN residency training and also maternal fetal medicine specialty, we teach young women to get their pap smears, to get checked for infectious diseases, to get breast exams, but we never have anything in our plan to teach them about their fertility. Now, I think a little bit that can change. Definitely that can change in the future to where we have certain discussions with women as we see them through their reproductive years about the fertility. But also the climate's kind of changed because with the advances in assisted reproductive technology, more women can have babies later in life. Yes, women do naturally conceive. I'm not saying that they don't. But now with the advances in assisted reproductive technology, and according to the CDC data, which was just released in January of 2016, more and more women are having babies after age 35 and even after age 40. So the capability is there, which means that education needs to be there. And that's why I wanted to start this site. Number one, to educate and make sure that women had accurate information. There's a lot of inaccurate information out there, and I want to make sure that women know exactly what they need to know.
What did you learn the hard way, Naomi and Melissa? I'm just trying to think of if you could advise your younger self or a younger person in your family who's thinking about, I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to wait till I'm 40. I'm going to do IVF if nothing else works out. Melissa, what would be your advice?
It's an interesting question. I think it's such a personal decision when and if to have a child. And what Dr. Clark was talking about, and we are encouraged as women to live our lives, to have our careers, and not just pop out kids at 25. And now you get that conflicting information that suddenly you're 35 and you missed the boat. And for someone who, to your question, for someone who was talking about having a kid at 40, I think I would suggest to them just to really study the risks, to study to get their, do heredity testing so you know where you started from. But to understand, it's a difficult way to put this, but to
just be candid. I know I've got a feeling you're holding back. Just be very candid, because I feel this is a conversation where people aren't candid and they learn out the hard way. Whatever you're thinking, just say it. I think you're trying to couch it a little bit. I don't know.
No, I think it is just up to their individual decisions.
Yeah.
I don't think people have to worry at 25, or should they worry at 25? Like, oh my gosh, I need to have a kid. I need to freeze my eggs right now. And to some extent, I worry that all of the discussion about the dangers and the risks and everything would lead somebody to, at 25, I need to freeze my eggs. And I have friends who are 40 years old now and have just said, never mind. I'm not going to, the option for having children is out the window. And that saddens me because I have friends who would make absolutely wonderful parents. And I don't think we should be discouraging it. And sometimes I feel like society does discourage it. And I know I personally was afraid when I started having kids, and it was a fear that I tried to put aside, but part of my brain thought, well, of course I'm going to have a kid who has problems. Of course I'm going to have dramatic problems when I'm pregnant. And it's part of that stress I was worried was going to cause problems during my pregnancy.
It's interesting, Melissa, because you're not the only one who then thinks those things and has those fears about pregnancy at an older age. This is Lindsay, who writes in, first pregnancy at 40s have higher risk pregnancies and its associated complications for both mom and baby, but especially to baby, this person says. Not sure about their own medical history or background there. But Naomi, is this one of the things that you were thinking about in your 30s? Oh, if I wait, I could have complications.
No, in my 30s, I was actually recovering from a car crash and I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and I would have made a really dreadful mother. And I didn't really meet anybody I thought was a suitable partner until my early 40s. And you have to appreciate that the compulsion to procreate is really very strong. So once you are in a situation where you've got your nest and you feel like you want to go towards making a family, it's really very difficult to fight that, because no matter how much information put in front of you about the possible risks, you think, well, maybe I'll be lucky. In fact, we were incredibly lucky. I had a absolutely faultless pregnancy. I was not coerced, but strongly encouraged to have a cesarean section because older mothers have problems with natural birth, and I didn't want to be that sad older mother insisting on having the full experience that would contradict the gynecologist, the obstetrician telling me that I needed a cesarean section. So I went with that. But all the way through, I really just expected or so hoped that everything would be okay, and luckily for us, it was.
Can I
I do have something I would like to say to younger women, though. And I do think a lot of women say to me, oh, Naomi, you're a beacon of hope because I look at you and I see that I could have my education and I can enjoy years in the workplace and there's still time to get it together. And never mind the fact that we were very, very lucky that on the 5th attempt, IVF did work. Never mind that. The fact is that if you think that you want family life, I think that it's something that you need to think about really early on and work towards it as if it was a job or a home or finding a relationship.
Sure.
And I do share that advice with younger women who want to talk to me about their future.
And that's a little Sadie there, and that's why you were talking, we showed the Guardian headline is why I'm going to be a first-time mother at age 51, and then we saw Sadie here, which was the product of your wanting to be a mum. Dr. Clark, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, based on what I think it was the tweet you just showed about complications, what I think it's important to remember, and it's going to be more commonplace to see older first-time moms. And socially speaking, these women should not be viewed any differently. A couple of important things to remember is, yes, women who deliver for the first time or even second or third time after age 35 or even after age 40 are at increased risk for certain medical complications at baseline, and that would be diabetes, high blood pressure, preterm labor and delivery, a smaller for gestational age fetus, or a baby that's a little bit larger than it should be. And as Naomi stated, a slightly increased risk of cesarean section, and also an increased risk of pregnancy loss, just based on the fact that a pregnancy in a mom over age 35 is an increased risk for a chromosomal abnormality.
Dr. Clark, this is quite scary what you're saying. Are you trying to reassure us? Are you trying to warn us?
No, well,
what's going on?
I'm trying to finish.
All right.
So these are women, and everybody know it's common medical knowledge that these women after age 35 are at increased risk for certain things. However, any woman that's pregnant can have these things as well. So we monitor as obstetricians and gynecologists for these things in every pregnancy. If a woman enters a pregnancy later in life, healthy, otherwise healthy, with no pre-existing medical conditions that are not controlled, she should expect to have a completely normal and healthy pregnancy. The only real risk is just based on her age alone. So that's the important thing to remember. Just because a woman is older does not mean her pregnancy is going to be fraught with complications.
Okay.
If she comes into a pregnancy with uncontrolled medical conditions, then that might be a little bit more complicated. But otherwise, she should be expected to have a normal pregnancy just like anyone else.
You know, Dr. Clark,
I mean,
picking up on the point that you raised about this being commonplace more and more, we got this tweet from someone whose name is also Femi. He says, medically and culturally, there are different answers to this. We moved to South Africa and we realized that hospital staff ridicule you if you're pregnant in your 30s. They say that that's too late. And so, of course, this differs from around the world. But Dr. Clark, I'm wondering what people in your own circle said when they knew that you were trying, what kind of reactions you got from friends, from colleagues.
Well, actually, being a medical professional, there's a lot of women like me. So I'm not necessarily alone. And then I also realized that after starting the website as well. I will just give you a little bit of my background. I married at age 39, first time marriage for both of us. Neither one of us had children. And I knew as soon as I met him that I wanted to be a mom. Now, I really never had that feeling before. So it did change when I met him. So the first thing I want to caution young women is not to ever assume in your 20s or early 30s that you're going to know what you want when you're older, because things change, especially when you meet that right person. We subsequently got married and have been through 5 cycles of IVF. All have been unsuccessful. Out of 34 eggs that I was able to get out of 5 cycles of IVF, only one of the 16 embryos we got was genetically normal. So that means 15 out of 16 of these embryos were genetically abnormal, and that's based on my age alone. Okay, I'm a healthy woman, and I should have known a little bit earlier that based on being an OBGYN that this could be a problem, but actually I wasn't really thinking about that. I think it wouldn't happen to me. So that's another point that I would like to make to young women is don't assume that if you wait later in life that IVF is a valid plan B. IVF does not always work. Yes, it's very successful in some women, but IVF in older women like myself at age 42 now, it's not always successful.
Dr. Clark, is there anything that you would have done differently? I mean, you more than anybody know exactly what the risks are, the stats are, the way your fertility goes down. Would you have done anything differently?
I wouldn't have done anything differently as far as my career path. I love my career, and I definitely wouldn't have done anything differently as far as the partner I chose. I was meant to meet my husband at age 38, and I was meant to marry him at 39. Unfortunately, we've had a hard time trying to become pregnant. The only other option that I could have had was to freeze my eggs. But that egg freezing technology has really gained a lot of advances in the past 6 years. So if I go back 6 years ago, I would have been 36 freezing my eggs, which still might have been a problem. The ideal age to freeze your eggs is the late 20s or early 30s, and I would have been well out of that window. So it's changed now, but for me, it may not have been an option.
All right.
Also, can we talk about the low success rate in using frozen eggs? Because it's held up as being this thing that young women ought to do. But in fact, as I understand it, it's still a fairly low success rate.
Egg freezing is now a very valid option, and the success rates in retrieval of eggs when we thaw them, meaning they've been frozen or on ice, and then you decide to thaw and use them, is actually very good now compared to 6+ years ago. So 6+ years ago, if you had frozen your eggs and say hypothetically you had 20 eggs, a smaller percentage would have actually survived the thaw, if you will. Whereas nowadays, most fertility centers who do a lot of egg freezing. Now, egg freezing is different than embryo freezing. Egg freezing is freezing the one single
Dr. Clark,
egg.
I've got 30 seconds left on this part of the show.
Yes.
So if you wanted to freeze your eggs, what's an ideal time to freeze them? What age?
The best time to freeze your eggs would be late 20s, early 30s.
Right,
Ideally,
early 30s.
well before age 35.
All right, get your eggs frozen before age 35 if that's what you intend to do. The technology is better. Do you have questions for our doctor about your fertility? If you do, I'm going to suggest that you go to our post show at stream.outerzero.com. Dr. Clark will be there, Melissa Reyes will be there, Nabi Grin will be there as well. Let me just check in with Malika. What kind of reaction has this conversation had online?
I'll share this tweet, which kind of sums up what others are saying, that children are a huge commitment. Once they're here, your life isn't ever the same. So your early to mid-20s is your time for exploring before they come.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for watching this edition of The Stream. To be continued, stream.outerzero.com. See you there. Hello again, we're discussing late pregnancy and motherhood. Well, first time late pregnancy, let's be very specific about this. I'm going to get right back to the conversation via this headline that is screaming at me. Janet Jackson is pregnant at age 49, exclamation mark. Let me just scoot down here. You can see Janet Jackson making the announcement. She interrupted her tour to have a baby. She was 50 on May the 16th, I believe. When you saw that headline, Naomi, what did you make of it?
I was thrilled for Janet Jackson.
Oh.
I don't know her personally. I can imagine that she has focused hard on career and maybe she hadn't met the right man. And I think it's just fantastic that she feels like having family life now, because it's really a very wonderful thing.
Sure. Melissa?
I thought, again, that there's a long road ahead of her, and it seems old. I mean, for what we've been taught is the normal age for children. But frankly, I looked at it and thought, why have I myself just washed away the idea of having maybe a third child in my early 40s? I say this as my children run back in the house right now.
Yes, just in time to get on TV. Excellent. Good timing, kids.
I just ran through the background.
Right.
But I looked at that and it gives me hope for me and my friends that there isn't a strict set of rules that we need to follow as mothers. And I think that's important for women.
You know, Melissa, trying to segue between what you said and the news of Jenna Jackson, we got this tweet from SMJ who says, I'm 29 and barely have the energy to keep up with my newborn. Jenna Jackson, of course, was on tour, so already she's dancing and singing, and now she's going to be pregnant, so she probably has no worries on that concern. But is this one of the things that worried you, keeping up, running after your rambunctious children?
I think any parent at any age has trouble keeping up with their newborn. I don't hear anyone at 20 saying, oh, yeah, it's a breeze. I think about it. I think about being 50 and wondering, what kind of shape I'm going to be in. But I think it's more important to know that I can instill knowledge on my child that's going to last their lifetime. And, I see women at any age, fathers at any age are in all sorts of, health conditions. I'm fine chasing after them, and I'm still tired, but you push yourself. And I think every parent pushes themselves regardless of their age.
Dr. Clark, I get the feeling behind these celebrity pregnancies that the stories are not totally transparent. They're not totally telling you, well, was there a donor egg involved? Was there IVF involved? I'm not sure that people necessarily should share that information, but I think we'd be a lot more honest about how we understand fertility and how you get pregnant in later life. If the stories that you hear, people are actually are very frank about how they did get pregnant. That's just my take. What's yours?
I'm all about transparency myself. I've been very transparent through my whole infertility journey, writing about it and blogging about it. I've even blogged about our last attempt was using with an egg donor. So we have chosen to use an egg donor in an attempt to get pregnant. The one thing I caution women when they read these headlines about the celebrities, you can name any number of them, there's many of them, getting pregnant much later in life, the chances are, realistically speaking, they are using help with IVF, with or without donor egg. Unless some of these celebrities froze their eggs much earlier in life, that would have been, let's use Janet Jackson for an example. And again, this is just my opinion in a hypothetical situation. Unless she froze her eggs 15 years ago when technology wasn't great, the chances are she may have used an egg donor. She may not. And we don't have to expect all these women to come out and be transparent about it. But other women who are seeing this need to realize that most of these women, or many of them, may have used help. And that it's not necessarily okay for everyone to just wait until late 50s or late 40s to have a baby for the first time. We have to be realistic about our fertility.
Naomi, I'd love to hear, I hear you jump in there, Melissa. Go ahead, and then I'll read this tweet to Naomi.
Well, sometimes I wonder, when I was pregnant, 39, 40, 41, all I hear about for women my age is the risk, is the danger, the challenges. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about the positive nature that women at 40 plus can bring to their children. And I know that I faced so much stress, just the fear, just the idea of having it, that I worry about the complications that could have contributed. I'm not saying that there's not increased challenge, increased risk to it, but I have friends who are 30, under 35 who are struggling to conceive kids, and it's there, but I don't know if that's the only thing that we need to be focusing on at 40 years old and being pregnant. And these discussions, I worry, are actually discouraging some women from even trying, when I know I'm coming from a very fortunate perspective that I did, have my two girls. Naturally, we didn't have complications, we didn't have a lot of challenges. So I have a very, refined perspective on it, but there's other focuses, there's other positive aspects that I think we could be looking at that would reduce the stress, I think, for women sometimes.
I mean, Melissa, you may not remember, right at the beginning of the show, right at the top of the show, in fact, I said this to Melissa as we were thinking about what do we talk about. It's like, let's start with what are the rewards, what are the pros. But it was so long ago in the conversation, you may have forgotten it, but we put it up there out front. We wanted people to feel like what you can share with us that actually works really well for you, regardless of however old you may be or what the added bonuses are of being mature mums. Malika.
And it's interesting that you mentioned you wondering whether this might be discouraging some women. We actually got this tweet not too long ago from Nora. She says, it's very interesting to hear about fertility so openly on TV and also being able to check people's opinions online. Kudos to all of you. So Naomi, I want to throw that over to you and your thoughts on talking about this on TV, given the sensitivities of then having a child who will grow up and learn about that conception and where you fall on that.
So first of all, I just have to say that the reason why women don't want to talk about artificial reproduction techniques is because it's information that's private to their children. So we can talk about ourselves, but as I said earlier on in the show, you asked why we weren't talking about our partners and how they felt. It's information that's private to them, and you have us in front of you. So I just want to clarify that's why I don't want to talk here with you about how I was able to have Sadie at 50. I would like to say, however, that the worst thing that happened to us in our journey to make a baby was after a couple of miscarriages. I went to see the consultant who looks after recurrent miscarriages in the teaching hospital, and she refused to test the sperm of my partner on the basis that I was too old for it to matter. And that was so discouraging that we then went into a corner for a couple of years, too ashamed that we had even been trying to have a baby, with me at 45 at that point. And I would like to say that discouragement is really that I received from her and from a couple of other people at that point is really why I've been open about talking about this.
Dr. Clark, if I may get personal, because you're doing a fantastic job of advising everybody about the realities of what fertility means for women as they get older. But then there's you trying, and you told us 5 IVF cycles.
Yes.
When have you decided this is the line and then I'm done?
That is such a great question. And, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, let me just put it to you this way. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I had told myself if I never had kids, I'd be fine. Yeah. A few years ago when I met my husband, I said, if we don't get pregnant naturally, I'm never doing IVF. But we changed. My feelings changed. My heart changed. Having the love of my life and wanting to have a child with him changed everything about me. So 5 cycles of IVF between ages 40 and 41 and a half has taken a physical and an emotional toll, but it did teach me one thing. I want to be a mom. And due to advances in reproductive technology, I do have other options, meaning egg donor, which we have used, and we do have 3 embryos left. After 2 failed embryo transfers, we do have 3 embryos left to transfer. We're kind of taking a little break right now, trying to decide what we're going to do. But, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's very individual. And I have definitely changed my thought processes on how far I would go. Would I look back, do I think I should have done 5 cycles of IVF? Probably not, but I did. I can't really change anything, and hopefully I will become a mom one way or the other. There are different options out there for me still, even at age 42.
I hear that
It's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, it was interesting that you say that, Dr. Clark, because that's how we started. We started saying, we'll just try it naturally. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I thought I convinced myself that it was okay, not having kids, and you get to the age of 40 and you think, oh, I don't have kids. I've been perfectly happy. So it's an interesting perspective to kind of see that, because I wondered myself, how far would I have gone if I try to convince myself, don't stress out, don't monitor, just take it easy. We didn't try to watch calendars or anything like that. But knowing in the back of your head, at some point, you always are going to get, disappointed to some extent. So it's an interesting perspective.
One other point I want to bring up as well is that, going through what I've gone through, one of the common questions I get a lot, both online through my website and personally, is why don't you just adopt? And I think about that a lot, and it's a very personal decision. I think my desire to try to experience pregnancy myself is very important. I've been around pregnancy my entire career, and I think it's beautiful. But for those women that are in my shoes, don't feel guilty if you don't feel like adoption is the option for you right now. It may be in the future. But society can be very harsh, and friends and family can be very harsh, actually. So it's very important for you to do what is right for you, both as an individual and as a couple. And whether or not you want to be completely transparent and discuss it, as I have, very publicly, it's a very personal decision. My main reason for doing so was to educate, because I didn't want other women to fall into the same path that I have. It's a very tough path and a very tough road, especially when you're a professional. And I've succeeded in so many ways, and I've done everything I've ever wanted to do, except when I decided I wanted to be a mom. That's the one thing that I haven't been able to do, and it's a very tough pill to swallow. And so that's one of the main reason why I wanted to share my experience.
Sure, Dr. Clark.
Now, Dr. Clark, would you? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
I was just curious.
I need to set up an appointment for you. Hold tight for 1 second. I've got Dr. Clark's number. We can sort out a little personal appointment going on here. Do you know what I was thinking, Dr. Clark? Because we're almost out of time on the internet, and I don't want the internet to shut down and we're mid-conversation. I've read the stories, I'm sure you've read the stories, where people are taking a little hiatus from having, trying for a baby, and then boom, they're pregnant. So maybe you'll be one of those stories.
Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's possible. All right, Melissa, you have the last word. Get it in there quick.
No,
what did you want to say?
I wanted to ask Dr. Clark, do you recommend that women now at 25 freeze their eggs? Our technology has improved. Is that just a safe bet for women to do?
I am unapologetically a huge advocate of egg freezing. I think it's something that women who anticipate earlier on delaying childbearing for any reason, but mainly because of career choices, it is a valid option. Yes, it's expensive, and it may seem like a lot of money, but if you think that you're going to be delaying childbearing until after age 35, egg freezing is a very, very valid option for women who are coming along and know that they're not going to have babies right away. So I am a huge advocate. There are many social media sites and websites dedicated to education on egg freezing, including my own. So it's something that if you thinking about it, go ahead and look into it and see if it's an option for you.
All right, so I'm just going to leave you with this, which is babiesafter35.com, because that's Dr. Clark's website. And if you are going to want advice about freezing an egg, I'd rather you went to her website as a starter. Malika, we're going to wrap up now. What do you have?
Really interesting experiences shared by all. Thank you.
All right, so Dr. Clark and Melissa Reyes and Naomi Grin, thank you. This was such a personal conversation, and we really appreciate you being part of it. We couldn't have done it without you. Take care, everybody.